The smell of pumpkin pie and pine always meant the holidays were here, but for me, Chloe Harrison, it just meant the bills were due. For years, I was the family fixer, the silent accountant for my brother's charm and my parents' denial. I was drowning in their debt just trying to keep my head above water. But this Thanksgiving, when my brother publicly humiliated my 7-year-old niece, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened. They all thought I was their safety net. They were about to find out I was their creditor. This is the story of how I finally collected. I hope you'll stay to hear it. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The scent of pumpkin pie, heavy with cinnamon and nutmeg, drifted from my tiny kitchen, mixing with the sharp, clean smell of pine from the cheap holiday candles I'd lit. It was the smell of Thanksgiving, or at least what Thanksgiving was supposed to be. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by rolls of glossy wrapping paper, meticulously folding the crisp edges on a gift for my niece, Lila. It was an advanced chemistry set, one she'd been circling in catalogs for months. I'd spent too much as usual, but Lila was the one bright shining spot in the tarnished Harrison family constellation. She was the only one who didn't look at me and see a solution to a problem. The candles weren't just for ambiance. They were a futile attempt to cover the scent of financial anxiety that seemed to permanently cling to my apartment. For years, Chloe Harrison, had been the family glue, the emergency fund, and the designated emotional punching bag. My younger brother Derek was the primary reason. Derek was all blinding charm and expensive smiles, a world-class manipulator wrapped in a cashmere sweater. He had a spectacular talent for failing upward. There was the eco-friendly smoothie truck that was mysteriously totaled for the insurance payout. The cryptocurrency consulting firm that dissolved overnight, taking half a dozen local investors' money with it. The string of failed ventures that always left someone else holding the bag. And every single time he crashed, my parents, Margaret and Thomas, would triangulate. The calls would start. "Chloe, honey, you know Derek. He just needs a little help to get back on his feet. Chloe, we have to hold the family together." Think of the embarrassment. Together was just code for Chloe pays. I'd covered his rent in 3 different cities. I'd settled his backroom gambling debts. I'd quietly paid back the friends he'd burned. My own savings account was a ghost of what it should have been, all sacrificed to maintain the illusion of the successful Harrison family, while my parents indulged Derek's every destructive whim and expected me to be the responsible silent fixer. This year, however, something had apparently shifted. Derek was hosting Thanksgiving, not at our parents' crumbling mortgage-heavy house, but at his new upscale townhouse in the suburbs. The invitation had arrived via a glossy group text, complete with a staged photo of a sterile dining room. "Time to show the family I've finally grown up," he'd written, adding a smug champagne glass emoji. I saw right through the performance. This wasn't maturity. It was a rebranding. This was Derek debuting his latest act, funded by God knows who, though I suspected I knew exactly who. A fresh, acidic wave of resentment washed over me. I looked at the pile of bills on my desk, the vacation days I hadn't taken in 3 years, the subtle crack in my own apartment ceiling that I couldn't afford to fix. I was done. I was tapping out. This Thanksgiving, the Bank of Chloe was officially permanently closed. I would go, I would smile for Lila, I would be civil, but I would not write another check. I would not offer another lifeline. The boundaries were going up tonight, and they were going to be made of steel. I finished taping the last edge of the chemistry set and reached for the other gift, sitting precariously on my coffee table. This one wasn't from me. It was from Lila, a gift for her grandparents. She had spent the entire month of October on it, a small, hand-painted wooden box. It was objectively clumsy, the paint a little too thick in places, the hinges glued on slightly crooked for Grandma and Grandpa, painted in shaky 7-year-old script. But it was pure Lila. It was infused with the kind of earnest sentimental care our family usually steamrolled in its rush to value the expensive and the impressive. I'd offered to wrap it for her just to keep it safe until we got to Derek's. I tucked it carefully into my canvas tote bag, zipped up my jacket, and grabbed my keys. Derek's townhouse was exactly what I'd expected: sterile, oversized, and screaming, new construction loan. It was the kind of place designed to impress strangers, not to welcome family. My parents were already there, fawning over a hideous chrome sculpture in the entryway that looked like a deflated balloon. "Isn't it wonderful, Chloe?" my mother whispered, clutching my arm, her eyes wide. "Derek is doing so well for himself." I just nodded, my stomach tightening into a cold knot. "It's big," I managed. Derek appeared from the kitchen holding a martini already halfway gone at 4 in the afternoon. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking blazer indoors, the perfect picture of manufactured success. "Chloe, you made it. Traffic bad?" he asked, his charm dialed to 11, kissing the air near my cheek. "Hi, Derek. Place is new," I said, stepping past him. Lila, who had arrived with my parents, ran up and hugged my legs. "Aunt Chloe, did you bring it? Did you bring my gift for Grandma?" I smiled, the first genuine smile of the day, and pulled the small hand-painted box from my bag. "Right here, sweetheart. Safe and sound." I held it out, intending to give it directly to my mother. But Derek saw it first. His eyes flicked from my face down to the small, earnest box in my hand. His lips didn't smile, but they curled, a slow, cold smirk of pure dismissive contempt. He didn't say a word. He just held that look for one beat too long, sizing up the childish gift with open disdain before turning away to greet someone else who had just walked in. But I saw it. The looming betrayal was suddenly so clear, it felt like the temperature in the pristine, oversized foyer had dropped 20 degrees. Dinner was a performance of hollow perfection. The turkey was professionally catered, the wine was expensive, and Derek's friends, a collection of equally slick, shallow people I didn't recognize, oohed and awed over the sterile elegance of his dining room. My parents were glowing, basking in the reflected success of their son. I picked at my food, the tension in my shoulders so tight it was giving me a headache. Lila next to me was vibrating with excitement. "Aunt Chloe, when can I give it?" she kept whispering, her eyes fixed on our parents. "After dessert, sweetie," I murmured, trying to protect her from the inevitable. But Derek, never one to follow a script, clinked his glass midway through the meal. "Well?" he boomed, a self-satisfied grin plastered on his face. "Since we're all here and feeling so thankful, I hear there are gifts." My mother clapped her hands. "Oh, Lila darling, did you bring something for us?" Lila shot out of her chair, her face bright with pure, unadulterated joy. I did. Aunt Chloe kept it safe." She ran to my bag and carefully retrieved the small hand-painted box. She held it out to my mother with both hands, a sacred offering. "I made it for you and Grandpa." Before my mother could even reach for it, Derek intercepted it. He snatched it from Lila's hands with a theatrical flourish. "Whoa! What have we got here? A masterpiece," he announced to the table. His friends chuckled. Lila just watched him, her smile unwavering, expecting him to be impressed. Derek turned the clumsy box over in his hands, his smirk growing. My, Lila. Is this from your art class at school? What is it, a birdhouse for a hamster?" He held it up for the table to see. "We'll put it right here on the mantel," my father said, starting to move. "Oh, don't be silly, Dad," Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. He shook the box, rattling the loose hinge. "It's cute. Really." And then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it. It wasn't a violent throw, it was worse. It was a dismissal. The box flew past my mother's outstretched hand and landed on a crowded side table, skidding off the polished wood and hitting the floor with a sad, dull clack. One of the glued-on hinges snapped off. Dead silence fell for a second. Lila's face crumpled. It wasn't a loud cry, but a single heartbreaking gasp, as her joy evaporated, replaced by a wave of crushing public humiliation. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked at the floor, her small shoulders hitching. That's when I heard it. My mother let out a high, nervous titter. "Oh, Derek, you're terrible," she said, waving a hand. My father chuckled a low rumble of approval. "Boys will be boys. He's just teasing Lila." They smirked at each other, sharing in their son's casual cruelty. Their laughter was the sound of my world breaking. The room swam. All the air was sucked out of my lungs. In that instant, every sacrifice I'd ever made flashed behind my eyes, hot and sharp. I saw myself at 22 transferring my first ever paycheck to Derek's account to cover a misunderstanding with his landlord. I saw myself 2 years ago sitting in my car until 3 a.m., negotiating with a very angry man Derek owed money to my hands, shaking as I drained my emergency fund. I saw my mother's face, tearful, pleading, "He's your brother, Chloe. It's what family does. We hold each other together." All this time I thought I was holding the family together. I was just holding Derek up. I was their human shield, their financial mule, the foundation they were all too happy to stand on while they let him chip away at me. And now they were letting him do the same thing to a 7-year-old girl. The rage was so potent, so pure, it nearly choked me. It was followed by a wave of profound, icy sorrow. This was my family. This was what they valued. The shame I felt wasn't for Lila's gift. It was for myself for letting this go on for so long. The guilt and doubt I always carried. Am I being too hard on him? Am I the difficult one vanished, burned away by the sight of my parents' smiling faces? There was no misunderstanding this. This was tacit approval. This was who they were. I looked at Lila, who was trying to discreetly wipe her tears on her party dress, her head bowed in shame. A new feeling crystallized inside me, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. It was resolve. No more. I would not let them break her too. I would not let their poison infect her. I was done fixing them. I was done saving them. I was going to reclaim every minute and every dollar I had ever spent on their behalf, and I was going to protect this little girl. The chatter at the table slowly resumed, Derek launching into an obnoxious story, the moment already forgotten by everyone except me and Lila. I didn't get up. I didn't scream. I slid my hand into my purse and pulled out my phone. My movements were quiet, precise. I angled the phone just slightly. Click. The flash illuminated Derek's laughing, arrogant face. Click. My parents sipping their wine, smiling at their golden boy. Click. And finally, I aimed it down at the floor by the side table. Click. A perfect, clear, heartbreaking shot of the small broken box and the snapped-off hinge lying next to it on Derek's expensive hardwood floor. My mind, usually cluttered with worry, went perfectly, terrifyingly quiet. I wasn't panicked. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was planning. He had no idea what he'd just done. He had just given me my first piece of evidence. The drive home from Derek's townhouse was a blur of silent, vibrating rage. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over, scorched away by the image of my parents' smirks. When I got back to my apartment, the scent of pine and pumpkin pie felt like a mockery. I blew out the candles, plunging the room into the cold, stark light of my desk lamp. The switch had been flipped. The part of me that had always hoped, always forgiven, always paid had gone dark. In its place was a cold, quiet engine of pure, methodical focus. I was no longer a sister or a daughter. I was a creditor, and I was here to collect. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a secret archaeological dig. I excavated the past 10 years of my life, not with a brush, but with a scanner and a spreadsheet. I opened a new password-protected folder on my laptop titled Contingency. Into it went everything. Every text message. "Hey Chloe, can you spot me just till Friday?" Every email from my mother. "Your father and I are a little short just to cover the mortgage, you know. Derek's venture needs our support." I reactivated an old bank account just to access the transaction histories. The endless one-way transfers labeled Family, Support, Derek Misk. I found the scanned copy of the loan agreement I'd written for his smoothie truck, the one he'd signed with a flourish and never paid a dime on. I documented the insurance premiums I'd paid on his car, the co-payments for his dental work, the utility bills for my parents' house. The numbers piled up staggering and obscene, a monument to my own willful blindness. I didn't just document my own losses, I started digging into Derek. His upscale townhouse was a rental I discovered, not a purchase. His consulting firm had no state registration, no business license. He was a ghost, a carefully curated illusion. I spent my lunch breaks in the public records database and my evenings researching financial and legal options. I learned the precise definitions of promissory estoppel, breach of oral contract, and fraudulent misrepresentation. I researched how to place a lien, the process for small claims court, and the legalities of repossessing property bought with funds acquired under false pretenses. The law, I realized, wasn't just for him, it could be for me. I felt like I was forging armor. With every piece of evidence, a new plate was hammered into place. But I was also isolated, drowning in the toxicity of my own family history. I needed air. I called Sarah, a friend from my old analyst job, who had the most finely calibrated bullcrap detector of anyone I knew. We met at a crowded, brightly lit coffee shop that smelled of roasted beans and sugar. "You look wired," she said, skipping the pleasantries as she slid into the booth. I hadn't intended to tell her everything, but it all came pouring out: the years of payments, the humiliation at Thanksgiving, the broken box, the spreadsheet. I finished, my voice tight. Am I crazy to be thinking this way about my own family? Sarah took a long sip of her coffee, her expression unreadable. "Chloe," she said finally, her voice firm, "you're not crazy. You're waking up. This isn't a family. It's a hostile financial entity with you as the sole asset. What they're doing isn't holding it together. It's exploitation, plain and simple. This idea that you have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm, that's not love. That's abuse." She leaned forward. "This country is built on the idea that you get to own your own life. Personal freedom isn't just a concept, it's a right. You've earned your independence. They haven't earned your paycheck." Her words were like a bracing wind clearing the last of the fog. She was right. This was an act of survival. I went home and made my first move. It was small, a test. A shared family mobile plan still inexplicably tied to my credit card was due. Derek's and my parents' lines accounted for 80% of the bill. For 6 years, I'd just paid it. This time I logged into the account, calculated my exact portion, and paid only that. I set my phone to auto-pay my single line going forward and removed my card as the primary payment method. It was a quiet click of a mouse, but it felt like slamming a vault door. I waited. The silence was loud. For 3 days, nothing. They were so used to my silent compliance that they hadn't even noticed. Then, on the 4th day, as I was adding a new subfolder to my contingency file, my phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Derek. It wasn't the explosion I'd braced for. It was far more insidious. "Hey, Chloe, weird thing. My phone data just got shut off. Must be a network error. Can you call them and fix it? Also, just checking in. You were so quiet at Thanksgiving. You seemed really off. Worried about you." The manipulative genius of it almost made me laugh. The feigned concern, the assumption that I was his personal assistant, the complete stunning ignorance that he was no longer talking to the person he thought he was. I stared at the message, a cold, sharp smile touching my lips. He had no idea. He was still playing the old game while I was already 3 moves ahead in a new one. I left him on red. The annual pre-Christmas potluck at my parents' house was a mandatory misery I usually endured with a bottle of wine and a forced smile. This year, I walked in armed with a fully charged phone and a heart rate as steady and cold as a frozen lake. The 2 weeks of silence since my text exchange with Derek had been deafening. I knew he was stewing. I knew my parents would be acting as his passive-aggressive proxies. The moment I walked in, the chattering stopped. My Aunt Linda gave me a look of profound disappointment. My father just grunted from his armchair, not even looking up from the football game. Derek was standing by the fireplace holding court with a cousin, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked like a predator who had just spotted his designated prey. He'd been waiting for this. He didn't even wait for me to take my coat off. "Well, well, look who it is," Derek announced, his voice slicing through the room. The new high and mighty Chloe finally decided to grace us with her presence. I said nothing. I just met his gaze, my face neutral, and began unbuttoning my coat. I could feel the collective gaze of the family on me. I'm worried about you, Chloe. He continued, taking a step toward me, adopting a tone of faux concern that made my skin crawl. You've been acting so strange. First you're sulking at Thanksgiving and now I hear you're cutting off Mom's phone. What kind of daughter does that? My mother on cue dabbed at her eyes with a napkin from the dining table. We just don't know what's gotten into you, she whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. After everything we've done. The familiar performance, the triangulation, the public shaming. Years ago, this would have shattered me. I would have stammered, apologized, maybe even cried. I would have felt the crushing weight of their disapproval, the desperate, clawing need for my own family to see me, to approve of me, to just once, take my side. That longing was still there, a dull ache in my chest, a ghost of the girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her. I felt the familiar burn of tears, the hot sting of injustice, the raw anger at the sheer blatant unfairness of it all. I had paid for the roof over their heads. I had funded the very whiskey in his hand. The financial and emotional labor of the last decade flashed through my mind, a tally of sleepless nights, missed opportunities, and endless one-sided sacrifice. But the cold, hard focus I'd been honing for 2 weeks held firm. The armor was working. I slowly, deliberately took my phone from my pocket. I swiped up, tapped the screen twice, and turned on the voice recorder. I set the phone face down on the hall table next to my keys, the microphone aimed directly at him. I was documenting. I was collecting. What's the matter, Chloe? Derek sneered, mistaking my silence for weakness. Nothing to say for yourself. You think you're better than us now? You make a little money and suddenly you can't even be bothered to support your own family. It's pathetic. You're cold. He was escalating, his voice getting louder, his face flushing with self-righteous anger. He was performing for the jury of our extended family, painting me as the villain, the ungrateful child, the one who was tearing the family apart. Every word he said was another entry in my spreadsheet, another file in my contingency folder. He was handing me the rope and all I had to do was let him. I let the silence stretch after his tirade, the only sound being the muted television and my mother's performative sniffing. The entire family was looking at me, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the apology, waiting for me to break. I did none of those things. I finally looked up, my gaze moving from my mother to my father, and then landing squarely on Derek. My voice, when it came out, was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of the emotion he was trying to provoke. You seem very upset, Derek, I said. It wasn't a question. You've built this new life of yours. I gestured vaguely around the room, which he'd clearly helped redecorate with my money on a very fragile foundation. I'd be careful about throwing stones. The shift in the room was electric. Derek's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock, then narrowing reptilian anger. I had broken the script. I hadn't defended. I hadn't cowered. I had threatened. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and slipped it back into my pocket. I turned to leave my coat in the bedroom. He followed me, grabbing my arm in the hallway, his fingers digging into my bicep. His charm was gone, replaced by the raw, desperate bully underneath. What did you just say to me? He hissed, his face inches from mine, the smell of whiskey hot on his breath. You think you're smart. You think you can threaten me. Get your hand off me, Derek. I said, my voice still level, though my heart was pounding. Or you'll what? Call the cops. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You want to play this way? Fine. We'll play. You come to my Christmas party. I'm inviting you. In fact, I insist. You come to my house and you try anything. I will bury you. I'll tell everyone the truth about you, Chloe. I'll tell them things you've forgotten. I will ruin you. He shoved my arm away, his eyes glittering with malice. He actually believed he had the leverage. He thought he was setting a trap. I just looked at him, rubbing the red marks on my arm. I'll be there, I said. I wouldn't miss it. He had just made his final critical mistake. He'd set the stage himself. Derek's Christmas party was exactly what I'd expected, a monument to his ego financed by my sacrifices. The townhouse was packed with the same slick, shallow friends from Thanksgiving, the bass from the stereo thumping so loud it vibrated in my teeth. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and mulled wine. I had come alone, leaving Lila safely with Sarah for the evening. I was here to finish this, and I would not have her anywhere near the blast radius. I moved through the party under the guise of a peaceful visit, a polite smile fixed on my face, my coat check tag clutched in my hand like a talisman. For an hour, Derek played the magnanimous host, all charm and expensive whiskey, though he kept shooting me sharp, assessing glances. He was waiting for me to make a move. He genuinely thought he held all the cards, that his threat in the hallway had cowed me. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The moment came just after 10 o'clock. Derek clinked a glass, bringing the pulsing music to a halt. "A toast?" he shouted, his voice already slurring slightly. The crowd quieted, turning to face him. "To a successful year. And to family. Even the ones who've lost their way." His eyes found mine across the room, cold and bright with malice. This was it. "Chloe, come on up. Everyone, this is my sister Chloe, the accountant of the family." He said the word like it was an insult. A few of his friends snickered. I felt the familiar hot sting of humiliation, but this time it was followed by a wave of pure cold adrenaline. He was setting the stage for me. "Chloe's been a little tight lately," Derek continued, his smirk widening. "She seems to think that just because she's got a little money, she's better than the rest of us. She even cut off our parents' phones. Can you believe that, at her own family?" A ripple of murmuring went through the room. People looked at me with open disapproval. "So, as a gesture of goodwill, Chloe, I'm giving you a chance to apologize, to all of us, for being so cold, so ungrateful, right here, right now." He was trying to publicly shame me into submission. He expected me to crumble. I just stood there for a beat, letting the silence stretch. Then calmly, I walked to the front of the room, stopping a few feet from him. "You're right, Derek," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, clear and steady. "Let's talk about money." I pulled my phone from my purse. "You're right, I am an accountant, and I keep very good records." Derek's smile faltered. "What are you doing, Chloe? You want to talk about being ungrateful? Let's start with the $15,480 I paid to settle your gambling debts in 2021. Or the $32,000 loan for the smoothie truck for which I have a signed promissory note you've defaulted on." I swiped on my phone, turning the screen to the crowd. "This is the spreadsheet, and these are the bank transfers. For 10 years. The mortgage payments for Mom and Dad's house that I covered so you could get back on your feet. The car insurance, the credit card bills, totaling as of this morning $148, $920. Not including interest." The room was dead silent. Derek was pale. "You're lying," he hissed. "She's crazy." "Am I?" I asked. I held up a small, slim key fob. "Then let's talk about the car. The beautiful new BMW you've been driving. The one you told everyone you got with a signing bonus from your non-existent consulting firm. A firm with no business license, by the way. I ran a public records search." I held the key fob higher. "I co-signed that loan, Derek, and that $10,000 down payment. That was a direct transfer from my savings account on August 4th. I pressed a button on the fob. Outside, the headlights of the BMW in the driveway flashed twice, followed by the sharp chirp of its alarm. "According to the terms of our co-signer agreement, which you breached by failing to make a single payment, I am the primary legal owner. And as of 5 minutes ago, a tow truck which I have already paid for hooked it up. It's being repossessed. Right now." Derek lunged. It wasn't a push. It was a roar of pure primal rage. "You bitch!" He screamed, his face purple, all charm gone, revealing the feral animal underneath. He grabbed for my phone, but I stepped back. And that's when my parents, who had been standing frozen, finally moved. My mother ran forward, but she didn't grab Derek. She grabbed me. "Chloe, stop this! How could you?" She shrieked, her nails digging into my arm. "You're ruining Christmas! You're ruining the family!" "He's your brother!" my father bellowed, stepping in front of Derek, shielding him. "You've always been jealous of him. Always, you cold, selfish girl." The masks were gone. They weren't just enablers. They were active participants willing to watch their son destroy me, and now willing to destroy me themselves to protect him. I looked at their contorted faces. The last lingering shred of hope that they would one day see me, that they would one day choose me, died. It was a painful, agonizing death, but it was also liberating. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. "I'm not the one who ruined this family," I said, my voice shaking but strong. I yanked my arm from my mother's grasp. "You did. You let this happen." I turned and started to walk toward the door, pushing through the stunned, silent crowd. Derek was trembling with rage, his friends staring, his entire fabricated world collapsing in on him. "This isn't over." He screamed at my back, his voice cracking with desperation and hate. "You're dead to me. You hear me? I will make you pay for this, Chloe. I swear to God, I'll see you in the gutter." The threat hung in the festive air, sharp and poisonous, as I pulled the front door open, walked out into the cold night, and didn't look back. The drive home from Derek's party was nothing like the silent rage of Thanksgiving. This time I wasn't vibrating with fury, I was just empty. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my own life, and the quiet ringing in my ears was the sound of the aftermath. I expected to feel regret, or at least the sharp sting of fear from his final threat. Instead, I felt a profound, desolate stillness. I had finally amputated the diseased limb. The phantom pain was awful, but for the first time I knew the rot wouldn't spread. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, just not for me. Sarah, my conduit to the outside world, reported that the party had imploded after I left. Derek's friends, who were only ever loyal to his performance of success, had evaporated. They'd witnessed the public repossession of his car and the raw, screaming, violent man he truly was. In his world, social capital was everything, and I had bankrupted him. The community he'd worked so hard to impress didn't just notice. It recoiled. The whispers about his financial troubles and erratic behavior started immediately. His carefully constructed illusion was gone, leaving only the pathetic, flailing reality. My own recovery began the next morning before the sun was even up. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee, the first I'd ever made that didn't taste like anxiety. I picked up my phone. Derek's number, which I knew by heart, was the first to go. Block contact. My mother's name stared back at me, and I felt a sharp, agonizing pang of loss for the mother I wished she was. Block contact. My father. Block contact. I went through my email, my social media, every digital tendril that connected me to them, and I severed them one by one. I set up filters to send any email from their known accounts directly to a trash folder I would never open. This wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. A sterile, necessary quarantine. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard, but it was a healing silence. A few days later, Sarah brought over a pizza and a bottle of wine. "To the Harrison Reclamation Project," she said, raising a slice. We didn't dwell on the drama. We talked about work, about a new hiking trail she'd found, about plans for the new year. It was so blessedly normal. Her presence was a quiet reinforcement of what true community felt like. It wasn't an obligation you were born into, but a support system you built plank by plank, based on mutual respect and independence. This was the American value I'd forgotten: you have the freedom to choose your family. That weekend I went and picked up Lila for a Christmas craft day. I hadn't told her I'd retrieved the broken box from Derek's floor during the chaos of the party. I simply set it on my kitchen table, next to a bottle of wood glue, a set of tiny clamps, and some gold acrylic paint. Her face fell when she saw it, the memory of the humiliation still vivid. "It's still broken," she whispered. "No," I said, pulling her into a chair. "It's just damaged. There's a difference." I laid the snapped-off hinge and the chipped wood on the table. When someone tries to break something beautiful, you don't let them win by throwing it away. You fix it. You make it stronger. We spent an hour meticulously gluing the hinge back in place, our fingers sticky. I let her paint over the chipped corners, and then I showed her how to trace the cracks with the gold paint. "It's like kintsugi," I explained, "the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery. It means you're not hiding the break. You're making the break beautiful. It's part of its story now. It shows it survived." When we finished, the box was still clumsy, still hand-painted by a 7-year-old, but now it was laced with shining gold veins. It was a scar. It was a symbol of our resilience. Christmas Eve arrived. My apartment was quiet, peaceful. Lila was back with her other parents. The repaired box sat on my mantel, catching the light from the small tree I'd bought just for myself. I was finally at peace, the constant low-level dread of my family's next demand finally gone. My phone vibrated on the counter. A voicemail. The number was blocked, but it had slipped through the carrier's system. My heart gave a single hard thump, an old reflex. I braced myself and hit play. It was Derek. But it wasn't the voice from the party. It wasn't the screaming, threatening bully. This voice was a ragged, wet whisper choked with something I couldn't identify. "Chloe, please, you gotta... Everything is gone. They took the... I'm sorry." The word was cut off, followed by a choked sob, then the click of the line. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an apology. It was a new, terrifyingly pathetic manipulation. A year ago, that sound would have destroyed me, sent me running back with my checkbook open. I stood frozen for a long second, the silence of the apartment pressing in. Then I took a slow, steadying breath, my composure absolute. I raised my finger and pressed 7. The message was deleted. I deleted the voicemail, but the silence it left behind was profound, echoing in a way the constant noise of my family's demands never had. On Christmas morning, I woke up not to the usual jolt of anxiety, the preemptive dread of a dozen guilt-laced texts, or the familiar stomach-churning obligation of a mandatory family brunch, but to quiet. Just the gentle hiss of the radiator and the sound of the city slowly waking up outside my window. I made coffee, my hands perfectly steady. The act of deleting Derek's message, of denying him that last shred of access, had been the final decisive click in a lock I hadn't realized I was building. I sat on my sofa, wrapped in a blanket, looking at my small bright tree. I thought about the word family. For my entire adult life, that word had meant obligation. It meant a one-way flow of resources, of love, of emotional labor. It meant being the dam wall standing alone against the flood, knowing that if I cracked, everyone else would drown, and it would be entirely my fault. I'd been conditioned to believe that love meant endless silent sacrifice, and that to draw a boundary, to say no, was the ultimate unforgivable act of betrayal. I saw the lie with perfect painful clarity now. What my parents and Derek called family was just exploitation dressed up in holiday sweaters. Real love doesn't demand you set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Real love doesn't make you smaller so someone else can feel big. My actions over the last month, the spreadsheet, the repossession, the cold, hard act of blocking their numbers, it wasn't betrayal. It was survival. It was the ultimate necessary act of self-preservation, the only way to save myself, and in turn save Lila from that same suffocating parasitic destiny. The heavy quiet of the morning gave way to a gentle, happy noise in the afternoon. My real family was arriving. Sarah showed up first, stomping snow off her boots, carrying a ridiculously large pan of lasagna. "I don't know how to cook a small one," she declared, dropping it on the counter. A couple of other friends from work, Mark and Jen, followed bearing pies and a good bottle of wine. There was no tension. There was no subtext, no performance, no walking on eggshells. We cooked together in my small kitchen. We drank, we laughed until my stomach hurt. The conversation was easy, flowing from bad movies to work gossip to plans for the new year. It was all so light. Later, Lila arrived, her other parents dropping her off for a few hours. She ran in, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes immediately finding my mantelpiece. "You put it up," she squealed, pointing with a mitten. The small, clumsily painted box sat in the center, its new gold veins glittering in the twinkle lights. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't a symbol of shame. It was a trophy. "Of course I did," I said, lifting her up. "It's the most beautiful thing I own. It shows how strong you are." She beamed a look of pure, unadulterated pride that was a universe away from the humiliation I'd seen on her face at Thanksgiving. She carefully placed her own small handmade ornament, a lopsided clay star on the branch right next to it. Hope and resilience side by side. Watching her, I felt the last knot of guilt in my stomach finally fully unravel. My agency, my autonomy. These weren't just abstract words I'd researched in a legal database. They were my new reality. I had taken back control of my life, my finances, and my future. The price had been the family I was born with, but the reward was the family I had chosen, and the tangible, fierce ability to protect the one person who truly mattered. I was no longer the fixer, the provider, or the victim. I was the protector. We were cleaning up the dishwasher, humming snow falling in thick, quiet sheets outside the window, when I went to get the mail I'd forgotten earlier. Tucked between grocery circulars and a credit card offer was a single thick envelope. Cream-colored, expensive vellum. My name was scrawled on the front in Derek's unmistakable, arrogant, looping handwriting. No return address. My breath hitched a single sharp reflex. This wasn't a desperate, drunken voicemail. This was calculated. This was his final sober attempt, a plea, a justification, or one last venomous threat. I held it in my hand. The old Chloe, the Chloe of a month ago, would have ripped it open, heart-pounding, desperate for an apology, bracing for an attack. The me that stood in the warm hallway surrounded by the murmur of real friends and the scent of pine just looked at it. I thought of the broken box, of Lila's proud smile, of the profound, earned peace in my own apartment. I didn't need to know what was inside. It didn't matter. The contents, whether apologies or poison, were irrelevant. They were a message from a world I no longer lived in. I walked to the kitchen, slid the unopened letter into the trash can, and buried it under a pile of discarded wrapping paper. I turned back to my friends, a genuine smile on my face. I closed the door on the last of my friends, the sound of their laughter fading down the hallway, and leaned against it for a moment, just breathing. The apartment was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one that had greeted me that morning. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of fulfillment. I walked back into the living room, the air still warm and smelling of the baked lasagna and the chocolate chip cookies we had decimated. The timer on the oven had chimed earlier, a gentle domestic sound that had felt like a bell tolling the start of a new life. This was peace. This was the safe, stable reality I had fought for. I stood by the window, watching the heavy, silent snowfall blanket the streetlights, the world outside going soft and white. In the reflection, I could see the soft, multicolored lights of my tree glittering on the glass. I thought about the word family. For decades, it had been a word that tasted like ash, obligation, and a one-way financial drain. It meant being the structural support beam for a house that was actively rotting from the inside. I'd been taught that resilience meant enduring their abuse, that love meant absorbing their toxicity and their debts, and that personal freedom was a selfish, childish fantasy. They were wrong. My parents and Derek had taught me that love was exploitation. My friends, the community I had built, the people who had just left my home full and happy, had shown me that love is respect. It is trust. It is showing up for each other not because you're forced to, but because you want to. The resilience I felt now wasn't the scarred toughness of an endless survivor. It was the steady, calm strength of someone who had reclaimed her own independence. I thought about the unopened letter in the trash, a final pathetic missile from a war that was already over. I felt no surge of anger, no flicker of curiosity. I felt only a profound, quiet sorrow for the people they were, and an ironclad certainty that I had done the right thing. Forgiveness wasn't about them. It wasn't about absolving them or forgetting the betrayal. It was about me. I had finally and completely forgiven myself. I had forgiven myself for the years I spent funding my own abuse, for my willful blindness, for prioritizing their comfort over my own survival. That chapter was closed. The betrayal had been a brutal, agonizing education, but I was stronger now, wiser, and fully, unequivocally empowered. The battle hadn't just been for me. Lila, who was supposed to have been picked up an hour ago, but was now happily marooned by the snow, padded into the room in her socks, holding a steaming mug of hot chocolate I'd made her. She was the living, breathing proof of my victory. She would grow up knowing her own worth. She would be supported, she would be creative, and she would be resilient, not because she'd been forced to endure cruelty, but because she was surrounded by love. She would never have to buy her family's approval. She clambered onto the sofa and curled up her small face, serious as she blew on the hot chocolate. Her eyes drifted to the mantelpiece, to her small, clumsy box, its new gold veins shining in the warm light of the tree. A small, proud smile touched her lips. I sat down beside her, pulling a warm afghan over us both. Outside, the snow fell harder, burying the city. But in here, there was only the sound of our quiet breathing and the soft, steady glow of the Christmas lights. I looked at Lila, her face relaxed and safe, and my own smile finally came genuine and light. It wasn't the loud, dramatic triumph of a revenge fantasy. It was the quiet, absolute cinematic victory of peace.
With that final quiet moment, Chloe Harrison closed a painful chapter and opened a new one, defined by peace. What did you think of Chloe's final move? We read every single comment of your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, please subscribe and leave a comment.
Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.